Metroid Prime 4 is a game that people had waited about 8 years to see. If I'm being brutally honest, people have been waiting for more than a decade for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. And the game came out back in December 4th, so that was like I want to say it was more than a week ago. And and yeah, I feel like this game for the most part has been off to a disappointing start in terms of sales. In fact, I feel like at this point, Nintendo should be ashamed of themselves because this is a game that people have waited too long to see. Metroid Prime 3 came out in 2007, and for a while, we didn't think we was ever going to get a sequel to that game. And then when news broke that Nintendo was actually working on a Metroid Prime 4 during the late teens, um, we saw like a reveal trailer that only showed the logo, and the logo for um the original version of Metroid Prime 4 was completely different than what we got in Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. It looked way better. And then and I think Bandai Namco is actually working on development of, or one of their studios is working on the development for Metroid Prime 4 originally. And then for whatever reason, Nintendo decided to scrap that and they decided to go with Retro Studios that worked on the previous three Metroid Prime games. And I don't know, I felt like an eternity waiting for them to finish the game. And I don't know, like I've been reading online, like a lot of people are just disappointed with what they saw, and how like this game is different from the other Metroid Prime games and not in a good way. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people complained about the open world environment because it ruins the backtracking experience because you have to drive through that big desert that's full of nothingness and crystals and all that other stuff, and it detracts from the overall experience that you would get in a Metroidvania game because that's pretty much what Metroidvania games are all about. And and one of the biggest complaints that people had about the game was like the NPC, specifically Miles. Miles talks way too much, has corny jokes, and even though he plays a substantial part in helping Samus Aran get from place to place, um, she helps her with her equipment and all that other stuff. It's just that I don't know. I feel like Miles is just shoved down your throat for a character that you can't play as. And I think Miles is supposed to be like an engineer, which is why he's so useful. And I found it funny how his name is the same as Tails' middle name from Sonic the Hedgehog. And the thing is, like, I feel like Tails from Sonic the Hedgehog was less annoying. In fact, he was a lot cooler, even though he was an engineer, and he was actually a playable character. This guy is not a playable character. He looks geeky. He's annoying as hell, and you can't even explore like a specific level in the game without him in your ear through your radio. And I feel like that's something a lot of people was really turned off by in relation to this game, and I don't know. It's just like I feel like the travel in this game was one of the biggest flaws that I have. Driving through that desert was something that pissed people off because there was no fast travel or anything like that. Some people felt like the cutscenes were way too long, and I don't know. I feel like the NPCs in general, because there's more of them. There's like an NPC in each level, and they do all the talking, while Samus Aran just stands around like a retard and says nothing. And I think they're trying to keep that whole silent protagonist thing going with Samus Aran because that's normally what she does. But at the same time, it just feels awkward when all the other NPCs talk and she doesn't. And then and another common complaint was that a lot of people had compared this game to Zelda Breath of the Wild because it was pretty much similar in terms of like exploration and I guess characters kind of like telling the story opposed to I guess the main character. And and I don't know, here's the thing. The whole silent protagonist thing worked for Link because Zelda is a bigger franchise. Okay. I feel like the storyline and the time travel and all that other stuff involving like the Legend of Zelda is something that pretty much makes the series what it is. It gives it its own distinct identity. And I feel like the games, along with the franchise, had grown in popularity as time's gone by. The same can't be said for the Metroid series, because if you look at how much like the Zelda series has sold since its inception back in the 80s compared to Metroid, it's not even close. Zelda completely dwarfs Metroid. And the thing is, like, Metroid is probably one of Nintendo's less profitable IPs. And and yeah, I mean, I feel like Nintendo realized that, and I think they try to make this game more like Zelda, hoping that maybe that formula would kind of rub off on, I guess, Metroid, and maybe players would like that because they like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and all that stuff. That's not the case. It's just this game doesn't really feel like a Metroid game. I feel like Nintendo was completely lost the plot with this. And don't get me wrong, like the gameplay and the design and all that stuff is pretty cool. Even the dialogue, like the voice acting is top notch as well. But I don't know, you just don't get that isolated like feeling of loneliness that you got in some of the older Metroid games. And I feel like it's one of those things where a lot of people felt like Nintendo was trying to copy the average modern day AAA big budget game, and it just like failed miserably at it. And another thing that pissed a lot of people off was that Metroid Prime 4 felt way too linear, and and that should never be the case in a Metroid game. And I have no idea, like, why they decided to turn down Bandai Namco. Because you look at Bandai Namco and the games they put out in the past couple of years, they've been on a roll. They've had some pretty big games like Elden Ring, Tekken 8, Dragon Ball Fighters, Tales of Arise, a lot of big games. They're supposed to be coming out with like Code Vein 2 next year, I believe. But yeah, it's just I have no idea what had happened there. And a lot of people, wonder what the original version of Metroid Prime 4 was supposed to look like when one of Bandai's studios was working on it, because a lot of people feel like it couldn't have been worse than this, because nowadays it seems like it's almost impossible for Bandai to put out a bad game. But that's something that's subjective. And the crazy thing is, when I went to Metacritic and I looked at the scores, the game got a Metascore of 79 and a user score of 82. And honestly, that's not bad, but for a game that people have waited over a decade for, I feel like it should have been higher. It probably should have at least been like it should have been in like the late 80s, early 90s at least. And and yeah, I honestly feel like with this game they waited way too long, because like a lot of people really didn't care about the Metroid series during the teens decade for the most part. It just kind of became an afterthought. So I feel like this is something that Nintendo should have followed up on a lot sooner. And and I don't know, I can't go on record and say that this game could end up being something that completely kills the franchise, but I highly doubt we're going to get a Metroid Prime 5 anytime in the future after this. And you look at the sales for this game, um, yeah, during its first week, it did like 3,000 in Japan. Overall, since its release, it did like roughly over 21,000. And that's not good, because I feel like it should have done at least a million within its first week, because that's how most successful games normally start off. They do at least a mil, within its first week or first month. Granted, it hasn't been a full month yet, but still, I mean, Metroid's been around since the 80s, and I honestly feel like this game should have done way better than it has so far. But I don't know. It hasn't been a full year. It hasn't even been 6 months just yet. So I don't know. We'll probably give it some time, and maybe it will hit at least 1 mil by then. But But yeah, I mean, I honestly feel like Metroid Prime 4, out of like the Prime series that we've gotten between like 2002 up until now, this is probably going to go down as like the least popular installment, if not the worst installment in the entire series. A lot of people feel like, I don't know, it feels like, like the NPCs, like, play a bigger role in the story than Samus Aran does, and Samus Aran just feels like a background character in her own story, and honestly, it should not feel like that, and I honestly feel like, it's one of those things where I guess Nintendo tried to do something new and it just backfired on them, and, and yeah, I mean, like, I haven't exactly like seen the price for this game, but it's probably something outrageous if you've seen in stores. This game is definitely not worth like $80 or anything like that. You can make the argument with Mario Kart World, like, okay, that game actually did like I mean, it was a significantly better game than this right here. But and hell, even Donkey Kong Bonanza, is more fun than this. But yeah. I mean, Metroid has never been like a major like, revenue earner for Nintendo in the past or anything like that. I feel like this is a game that exists mainly because of like popular demand and people wanting to see like the Metroid series make a return. But because a lot of people like Metroid Dread and they thought I mean hell, I'll go on record and say that Metroid Dread was better than this, but yeah, I mean, it is what it is. And and yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like Metroid, I feel like for the most part, like this particular game, it just seems like creatively bankrupt and it seems like I guess like they were just trying too much to emulate other games opposed to just being Metroid. And I feel like that's something that hurt the overall quality of the game. But even if like Nintendo had like stuck to the basics and went with the tried and true and tried to make it more like a Metroid game, it probably would have flopped anyways because I've been reading a lot that a lot of people aren't really buying Switch 2s and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, it's like the Switch 2 is actually doing decently sales wise. I think it's done around like 10 mil like so far. But at the same time, a lot of people feel like it's going to end up being like GameCube or the Wii U, where it's like a good console, but then it's going to be a commercial failure in the long run because they feel like the price for the Switch 2 is unreasonable. They feel like, $450 for that. It's just, I don't know, for a console that runs like, off of like, PS4 quality, like it's just unreasonable for the most part. And again, you got the price of gaming going up and a lot of people are pissed at Nintendo as it is for various things. And and yeah, I mean, I have no idea exactly like if things are going to get better for Metroid Prime 4, if it's going to end up selling more in the future, are people like gonna eventually like start boycotting like Nintendo even more and that's gonna hurt future games or anything like that. But I do feel like for the most part, Metroid Prime 4 should have been better than what we got. And if this is any indication of how like future like Nintendo games are going to look like, then honestly, that's big trouble for Nintendo.